welcome listeners to a budget special of all things property. Now, the reason we're holding it, obviously, we've just heard Rachel Reeves' budget speech today. We are asking, what does this actually mean for landlords and properties in the UK? Should start off also by saying that this is for discussion only. We are not providing tax or financial advice. So, Ian, having listened to the budget, give me a one sentence gut reaction to what you've heard.
I think generally from a landlord or investor perspective, it'll end up being a good thing for the people who stay in the market. And as usual, if tenants are getting kicked again, I think the net effect of that will be property supply will decrease, and the obvious effect of that will be fewer properties around, same number of tenants, and rents will increase.
So let's strip it back to what matters. For me, I think there were two headlines, weren't there? Tax on property income is going to rise by 2 percentage points, and obviously there is a, in inverted commas, mansion tax. So let's talk about the tax on property income first.
Okay. Well, basically, it comes into effect on, as far as I'm aware, in April 2027.
Yeah.
If you have rental income, gross rental income of £10,000 in a single year, currently you'd be taxed at a rate of 20%, which would be 2,000. The new tax, as from 2027, will be 22%, and that would net effect of that would be you'd be taxed at 2,200. So it's an increase of £200 per annum on an income of £10,000, which to your average investor, I guess, isn't that significant. He could do without it, but there are plus points that we can talk about later on in the discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. At the end of the day, it's 2%, and I was just doing some quick maths, I suppose. For if you were taking a average monthly rent of £1,500, that's £18,000 a year income. So the extra tax that a landlord is going to pay, the extra 2% that they will end up paying over the year, is what, £360 on a £1,500 a month rent, equates to £30 a month. Is that in reality going to, make a landlord go, oh, this is no longer for me? Or is the reality that at some point in time that £30 will be passed on to the tenant in a higher rent?
I think it's a given, isn't it? That's what usually happens when an extra cost on a landlord is dumped on a landlord. It'll be passed on to the tenants.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, the higher up you go, it's still, when you really look at it, will it really bring in that much extra revenue? Because there'd been lots of talk, hadn't there? Lots of rumours around maybe national insurance on rental income. That would have had a much bigger effect. But for me, whilst there's obviously a cost implication to it, I don't think it's going to make many landlords go, yeah, rental isn't for me anymore.
I think people need to, after any budget, people need to sit and take a few months to see how things settle down, and then don't make any knee-jerk decisions. You're always going to get some landlords that say, that's it, that's the straw that's broken the camel's back, I'm out. But it's not necessarily what they end up doing. So no, basically the message would be no knee-jerk reactions, just run with it and see what happens.
Yeah, no, I agree. So moving on then to the mansion tax. What are your thoughts on that?
It's going to affect London rentals, I guess, isn't it? And once again, it'll probably get passed on to the tenant. Mansion tax, council tax, the tenants pay council tax. The landlords will think, why can't they pay the mansion tax? Privilege of living in a very expensive home, I don't know. It'll either be passed directly on to the tenants, or it'll be passed on by way of rent increase.
Okay.
It's a good way of earning cash for the treasury, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wonder how workable it's going to be. So, just for those people that aren't quite sure what the mansion tax actually means, it's going to be in the form of a council tax higher value supplement. So, for properties over £2 million, there's going to be a is it £2,500 council tax
Yeah.
supplement, and over 7.5 million, um, over 5 million rather, there's going to be a £7,500 council tax supplement. But for me, it's like, well, that means that they're going to have to revalue every single property, because how do you suddenly say, well, my house is worth 1.8 million or it's worth 2.1 million? Who will do that? So I wonder whether or not the cost of implementing it will far outweigh the cost of, what comes into the Treasury coffers.
I'm sure the government will develop an amazing algorithm that works out property values in and around London.
But it's not just London. It's
No, I
not
know
just
it's
London, is
everywhere.
it?
It's everywhere, but predominantly London, isn't it? London
Yeah,
based.
yeah. Well, it is in terms of the predominance of, houses of that value. You get a higher proportion of that value house in London than you do elsewhere. But if you live out, I don't know, in the country somewhere, who's going to say your house now is worth £2 million when it might only be worth £1.8 million? Is that going
Well,
to be a surveyor?
yeah, I think the government will start with valuations of their own. Who they use to do that, I don't know, and then they'll give the right of appeal to the owners
Hmm.
to reassess the value.
So for
A
me,
bit
that
like HS2
right.
when they bought up blighted properties. The government worked out a system of valuing properties there. They'll probably use something similar to that, I would imagine. And then the right of appeal obviously is there.
Hmm. But
Hmm.
that again, that just seems a very, I understand the principles of I suppose, what they're trying to achieve, which is, the higher earners and the people who have, you know, high value assets should pay more. That was very much Labour's, you know, outline in the budget. I know they're trying to aim their tax increases at, the super rich, but it just seems a very unwieldy way of doing it, and they'll end up having to, find a mechanism that works for that.
But
I
will
think
they?
that I just think there'll be loads of appeals, and if you're on that threshold of owning a property between 1.7 and 2.25 million, that there will be a cliff edge, I would have thought, in terms of, um, people not wanting to, the impact of owning a property on that band.
I don't think they're going to reband every house. That every property in the UK or in England is banded for council tax, isn't it? So
Hmm.
why would they need to change the system? If you're a band D or band G or whatever you are, that's based on the value of your property. So they'll use those parameters to assess the.
Yeah, I mean, there was talk earlier that, the councils, or they were going to revalue everybody in council tax bands F, G, and H. But there will be lots of properties in rural areas in band F, G, and H that aren't £2 million houses.
Well, if they're not £2 million, well, we'll have to wait and see what method they come up with, I guess. But
Mm.
I agree with you. It's going to be more. Is it going to be more work than it's worth?
Yeah, yeah. I don't
Council.
think I don't think it will necessarily make people, downsize. It won't have a massive impact, I don't think, on the housing market in terms of, and maybe London sits separate to this discussion. We don't operate in London anyway, so it does make you wonder whether or not the mansion tax really isn't going to have a massive impact on the housing market for the average person, I would have said.
No, definitely not.
So in terms then of impact on the housing market, what do you think the impact's going to be in terms of the rental market?
It'll take time to filter through. I don't think you're going to get a mad rush to sell property for investors or landlords to sell property. I think you'll get a small minority that do. I think most of them have been expecting this or something potentially worse than this. So in a way, it'll be pleasant to hear, I guess. Not as bad as they thought.
Mm,
I think the net effect has to be that it is going to reduce the stock of properties, not dramatically. I don't think it'll filter through for 12, 18 months, even 2 years. People aren't going to rush to sell their properties. You're talking about their pension pots. For a lot of landlords, this is all about their pension disposable income when they retire. So selling their properties that they may have bought 10, 15, 20 years ago, standing the capital gains tax liability and having to reinvest somewhere else, it's just too much.
mm.
I can't see them doing it.
No, I can't either. I think that, for me, the impact will be that, these changes don't come into effect until April 2027. So I don't think there's going to be any immediate changes. I think at some point when these changes do occur, we will see the inevitable costs being passed on to tenants in the form of higher rents. And I think in terms of the actual housing market, there's been so much wild speculation, for example, that houses over £500,000 would have taxes imposed on them. I think that's led to the housing market being very quiet and almost stagnating over the past 3 or 4 months. I think there is an incentive now for people who were thinking of selling but held off because they were worried as to what the budget might change. There is an incentive now for them to, carry on and put their properties on the market and continue to move forward.
Yeah, it might well kickstart the housing market with sales.
It would be nice if it did, because I think the market is incredibly quiet at the moment.
Class it has been for a long time, I think.
Yeah, it has. It has. Okay, so rather than drag it on, I think we've surmised or summarised what the major announcements today were. Tax on property income, tax on properties over £2 million with a surcharge. In terms of practical actions for landlords to take on board, it would be a good time maybe to review their tax position and structure of their portfolio. Maybe run updated cash flow projections and understand the impact for them. And the other action I think I would like to propose is that maybe we invite questions from landlords for a follow-up question and answer session. I don't know what you think about that one, Ian.
Good idea. Stimulate a conversation. It might be worth saying also that this 2% tax increase doesn't apply to incorporated portfolios. It's only private individuals.
Yes, and I think there's a much wider discussion then as to should landlords, put their properties into an incorporated company or not. And I think nothing's really changed on that. It's not worthwhile unless you've got a portfolio, probably, I would have said, of, in excess of 3 to 5 properties. Okay, well, brilliant. Thanks for that, Ian. Good to catch up with you and speak soon. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the All Things Property podcast. If you found this episode useful, don't forget to subscribe, like and share. These things really help us reach the people who need to hear this advice. See you next week.